the iPhone is losing its sheen. Sales of the handset account for half of Apple's business, but fell 17% in the first quarter. That's as Huawei sales soared by more than half, cementing its position as the world's #2 smartphone maker behind South Korean giant Samsung. Apple also shipped fewer Macs, leading to a 5% drop in revenue from personal computers. But the company says it's still optimistic thanks to the strong performance of its other products.
We are excited as ever about our pipeline of innovative hardware, software, and services.
There was a 30% jump in sales of the Apple Watch, home products like the Apple TV and the Apple Pod, and accessories such as cases and speakers. Revenue from the iPad also rose 21%, the fastest growth in 6 years. And service revenue went up 16%. That segment includes Apple Pay, as well as iCloud and Apple Music subscriptions. The company says it'll make that branch of the business even stronger with the launch of a movie and TV streaming service this year.
We feel we can contribute something important to our culture and to society through great storytelling.
Analysts say, given Apple's late entry, it will need to outspend other players in the streaming game to get customers to switch from rivals like Netflix and Amazon.
There's one thing we've learned in the past: people don't want 26 different subscriptions for anything. They want 1 or 2 basic gateways to content, and Apple's going to have less content.
Disney also plans to launch its own streaming service, which many analysts say will be tough to beat given its vast library of content. But as Apple wants to show investors, it pays to have your eggs or fruit in more than one basket. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on Apple's latest results now with Santosh Rao in New York. He's the head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners. Welcome back to the program, Santosh. So, some more bad news for Apple about its flagship iPhone. The iPhone, though, is still Apple's biggest money spinner. How long do you think it'll stay that way?
Well, I think at this point it is on a decline, that's for sure. So it'll stay there at least till the 5G phones come out, which is not going to be before September of 2020. So I think that's the next catalyst for the phones. But until then, you're going to see a lot of headwinds for this, really the flagship product for Apple. The bigger thing, I think, overall, I think this quarter, what you saw was China was a little firmer. I think the comments by the CEO saying that December was strong. So that's expected to get firm after last quarter's disaster. So I think market is giving them the benefit of doubt, saying that maybe China will come back. But there is competition there. The lower priced phones are competing very strongly with iPhone. But they're rationalizing the prices there. So it's still work in progress, China is. The new digital products, again, Apple has the resources to make it work. They have the money, and they will get the benefit of doubt with close to over 1 billion users on their phones. So they have a ready-made audience for them. So I think they get the benefit of doubt to do well. But at this point, they have a lot to prove.
Yes.
That's what's happening.
I want to ask you about Apple's digital services in just a moment, but sticking to its iPhone, as you say, we've got lower cost competitors such as Huawei offering, in fact, better phones with better specs than iPhones. Is it just a matter of Apple cutting the cost of the iPhones?
Yes, I think essentially that's what it comes down to, because you really cannot have $1,000 phones in India and China, which is their growth markets. I mean, their GDP is just not enough to sustain that price. So I think that you will see that they will have to cut down, they will have to compete on features, and it's going to be a heavy lift because that competition is pretty strong. But they can do it. There'll be margin pressure on their on the overall gross margins, but I think in the end they have to do it. The US is saturated. The developed world is saturated. Emerging market is where the next growth area is. For iPhone to be a relevant product down the road, I think they will have to really reduce the price points, which they will do. They're pretty innovative. They have the R&D and the resources to reinvent themselves, and they will do something about it.
As you say, the good news for Apple is their services business is growing at a remarkable speed. It's hit an all-time high in the last quarter. These products include Apple Pay, Apple Music. Do you think this business will be the goose that lays the golden eggs for Apple going into the future?
Up to a point, but you have to realize the services business is a function of the total iPhone sales in the end, the iPhone base. So to the extent that phones are getting, the replacement cycles are getting elongated, people are holding off. And if you have this narrative of the 5G phones coming, people are going to hold off on buying. So to the extent that's going to happen, I think services revenues will be limited. Of course, within the ecosystem, within the base, services will grow, but there is an upper limit to that. They need the hardware. It's still a hardware company. They need to grow that. They need to at least stop the slide of iPhone sales. But we'll see. I mean, it goes in cycles. The replacement cycles are 3 years old. The number of phones are more than 3 years old in some cases, so they need to come back and buy them. So there is demand in the pipeline, but it's just a question of timing. It's getting delayed for a couple of reasons. It'll stay there for a while.
And what about the new
it'll
services?
come back. I mean, the demand will at some point.
Yes. And what about the new services that Apple announced in March,
Yeah, I mean,
including credit cards, TV streaming service, games platform? Do you think they'll take off?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they have a captive user base, so they can introduce these things. They can give them free options for a while, for 3-month trials and all that. So if you have 1.5, 1.6 billion users, whatever the user base is exactly, I think that's a great one. I mean, they have a ready-made audience, and they can get people into their ecosystem and find and make them stick there. So all the services, they have a good opportunity, good chance of succeeding, but not necessarily. Like in the case of Apple Music, for instance, they're more than Spotify at this point, even though Spotify is a much better service. But if you ask anyone, they will say they prefer Spotify to that. But getting iPhone Music is so easy. Just press a button because you have it. So things like that. So they have an advantage in that sense, but they still have to prove it. The competition is pretty strong in all those service areas. So it's not going to be easy, but they have a good chance to do it.
I guess you've got to be in it to win it. Santosh Rao in New York, thank you again.